Welcome to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. I'm Jake. I'm here with Dan. Today we're going to be talking about doing a video on George Patton and talking about some of his guns and just kind of him as an individual. Before we get started with that, though, be sure to check out our Patreon page. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. Whatever you can do to help support the channel is greatly appreciated. So with that out of the way, let's go and get started. So George Patton is a somewhat controversial figure in American history. We'll get into the controversial parts here in a bit, but he was born in 1885. He was raised in a military family, and from a young age, he kind of just knew that was going to be his career path, and ended up joining West Point, graduated from West Point. He was actually an expert swordsman, world-class swordsman, I should say. Traveled to Europe and did quite a bit of teaching and being taught from sword masters in Europe as well. And interestingly enough, he helped design the last U.S. cavalry saber. It was known as the 1913 saber, or more commonly referred to as just the Patton saber. It was very heavily influenced on the thrust, kind of had a skinnier blade that was really meant for thrusting. The previous sabers had a kind of a curved blade for slicing, and but yeah, so that was an interesting point. He competed in the 1912 Olympics with the first modern pentathlon, and he competed in a bunch of different things from like shooting and swimming, fencing, running, and then it kind of averaged out your scores, and that determined who was, first place, second place, and whatnot. And there's a little bit of controversy with that. With the shooting segment, Patton refused to use a .22 caliber handgun like most of the other contestants, and instead was using a Colt .38 caliber service revolver. And with his shooting, it's kind of a little hazy. At one point, one bullet appeared to have missed the target completely. He claimed that he put two bullets through the same hole of the paper target, and depending on whose story you believe, the judges ultimately said he missed the target completely. But if he had put two through the same hole, he actually probably would have come away with a medal from the Olympics there. Let's see. I know he was posted in the cavalry and stationed in Texas, and in 1915 actually he had been issued a 1911 pistol, probably very similar to this one. This one's a cylinder and slide first 500, kind of replicating the early 1911s. But he had actually done some work to his 1911, trying to get the trigger nice and light.
He succeeded.
He succeeded. Apparently, he got it a little too light, and he was in a saloon in Texas and wasn't wearing a holster, just had it kind of tucked in his pants. And apparently, the story goes that he stomped his foot and the gun went off. And after that, he never really trusted the automatic. And it's like, well, it was kind of your own damn fault for working on the gun. Alcohol may or may not have been involved. Who knows?
It was a saloon.
Who knows the full true story? What actually happened there? But regardless, from that experience, Patton was like, well, I want something that's trustworthy, and that kind of leads into his famous single action army. So of course, in 1916, a big event happened there. Patton saw his first combat in Mexico with the Punitive Expedition. I'll let Dan actually talk to you a little bit about that and Patton's single-action revolver.
Yeah, that's a really interesting page in history because most are familiar with Black Jack Pursing and his involvement in that whole situation. But let me give you some dates that are kind of important. One was March 4th of 1916. And on that day, Colt single action with serial number 332088 left the Colt factory, headed to Shelton Payne Arms in El Paso. 4 3/4-inch 45 had fitted on it ivory grips at that point, but it was when it got to Shelton Payne, it received a full coverage engraving, It was a standard pattern Colt engraving. Now, I've done some research. I've asked a lot of Colt historians and so on. Nobody's been able to give me an answer, so I got to speculate a little bit here. At that time in El Paso, there was a lot of saddle and bridle bit spur makers and so on. Very typical for them to be engravers. And I think that probably an El Paso engraver, an independent shop that was known for his engraving, sat down and took the Colt pattern basically and executed the engraving on that gun. Of course, silver and our spur and bit makers, typically silver plate stuff. He did the silver plating at that time. And Patton took delivery of the gun just almost immediately. But again, that was March 4th. And on March 9th of 1916, so just 5 days after that gun made it to El Paso, Pancho Villa had 400 of these men ride across the border and into a little New Mexico town called Columbus. So the Mexican president had just been endorsed by the U.S. President Wilson, and this infuriated Villa, Pancho, and he, of course, sent 400 of these men into Columbus, New Mexico, across the border. They crossed about 3 miles from the town, about 3 or 4 a.m., and the town was quiet, sleeping. They came in and they went to work on the town. They were shooting it up, killing people. But what they didn't realize is that their 13th Cavalry was stationed there at the time. And that literally saved the town because they went to work on the rebels and they killed, I think, depending on what sources, close to 70 of them. And they even did chase on them and didn't, until they ran out of ammo, basically. And so the war was heating up. Now, what's interesting is that Patton was a little bit irritated that he wasn't able to get in on this action on Villa, or Villa, I guess I should pronounce it correctly. And so his sister Nita, I think was her name, was actually dating John Pershing, or Blackjack Pershing. So he had in there, and he was able to basically Pershing took him in as his own personal person to oversee this conflict. Well, ultimately, later down the road, President Wilson denied military action going further into Mexico, but that's a whole nother story. So it really limited what the U.S. military could do in this event. It was May 14th, so a couple months had gone by, and Patton led what was the first military battle or attack using a motorized vehicle. He had Dodge Brothers had started in business in 1914. And he had a 1915 touring coupe. He actually had 3 of them. He and his men went down, in pursuit of Pancho, and they didn't catch up with him. But these were the Dodge 3035, I think, is what those early cars were known as. He went down, pursued, caught up with these guys. Actually, just very similar to what Blackjack Pershing was, and what Patton did for the rest of his career. He got in a situation, instead of kind of humming or hawing, deciding the best way, he'd just charge. That's what he knew. Let's go forward. Let's get this done. And he charged in on them, and a gun battle ensued. And here's where it gets really vague, really sketchy, because depending on whose version you read and what happened, depends on who killed who and so forth and so on. But we do know that Patton was charged by a horseman. He instantly took the gun, using 5 rounds, not 6, 5 rounds. He's smart enough to carry it with only 5. Pulled down, boom, 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 shot this guy. Actually had his arm flapping at one time. And then, of course, the battle ensues. There was 2 other guards. This was a colonel out of Villa's army. And there was 2 other guards that there was more shooting. And ultimately, one of them broke on a horse, heck bent for leather, if you will, trying to get out there. Patton took the revolver, and he'd been trained the best way to stop a horseman is stop his horse. So that's what he did. He shot the horse out from underneath him. The horse goes down. They run into a building. It was a really bloody gun battle. Patton, of course, had to reload, and he's running his 6th gun, reloading, and ultimately all 3 of them were killed. Most stories will agree that Patton put a bullet in all three of them. He took credit for killing two of them, and their last names, of course, Colonel Cardenas, and then he took also credit for Juan Garza. Captain Lopez, of course, he took credit for wounding all three, and most accounts will agree with that. But at this expedition, he came back and put two notches on the left side of his grip of his gun, right here, of his stock rather, and that represented that battle. Now the word went out across the nation of this battle and so on, and Patton instantly became very famous. He's like, hey, now here's a guy that he doesn't mess around. And the one of the neat things actually about Patton was that he was at the front of charges. In other words, he didn't stand back and by command, now go get those guys. He was at the front. I mean, he was not afraid. He had plenty of real grit, if you will. And so it made him very popular. And we could speculate maybe another day, but I've read a lot of books on Patton and his methodology and so forth. There's incredibly overwhelming evidence of how much the facts surrounding his death at the end of World War II in 1945. It certainly appears that there was a conspiracy, and honestly, without doubt, he was aligned to become the president of the United States. He had a lot of people that did not want him in that position, and ultimately, I believe he's murdered. So whatever that's worth. But he also, interestingly, that gun. Of course, that battle took place in 1916, as we know, in May, and that silver-plated Colt accompanied him throughout, various conflicts and wars. He was famous for carrying it throughout World War II. Whenever he dressed the troops, he always had it visible. Later, he actually got one of the very first Smith & Wesson registered Magnums. Now, this one's a 4-inch barrel, registered Magnum, 357 registered, introduced in 1935. His was a 3.5-inch barrel. This one's a Ford. Both very rare, very desirable. 5 years later, in 1940, he had it fitted with ivory grips, so he'd actually carry the Smith & Wesson in the left holster and the Colt on his right. So a lot of people say he wore a pair of ivory-handled cis guns. Well, he wore two ivory-handled cis guns, but they were not a pair, Smith & Wesson and a Colt. He called this his killing gun, by the way. And he actually had S.D. Meyer's company make him a holster to his design. Pretty interesting. We'll cover that sometime. And this is, of course, built by Bobby McNellis out of El Paso Saddlery years ago. He's long since passed. But there you have it. Now, this gun, some people are going to want to ask a little bit about this gun. I'll tell you about it briefly. Of course, the original Patton gun is in the military museum, and only the president of the United States can touch that gun. I'm joking. And the proprietor, and I mean, it's obviously very well protected and where it should be. So, in honor of that gun and of the man and who he was and so on, I decided to build one like it. So, I had an opportunity to buy a Colt, and got to get this. This gun, I checked with Colt Factory on it, and this gun was made February 29th of 1916. So it was leap year, and that's when it left the Colt Factory. It left originally as a 4 3/4 inch 45, went to El Paso, Texas, same place Patton's went. And what's interesting is they would have been on the Colt benches in production at the same time. So this gun literally, right from the era of George Patton's personal Colt revolver. Now, this one unfortunately did not carry all the engraving and so forth of the Patton gun. So I commissioned, after a complete rebuild of the gun, freshened up in every aspect. So the gun virtually is brand new. And yes, I've shot it and sighted it in and the whole shebang. And anyway, I sent it to Dennis Keyes, who was a master engraver for Colt for many years. He began in Colt 1968 or 9, I think 69, I believe, right after he graduated from high school. Dennis's art is fabulous. I mean, his handwriting looks like it was done by a computer. You know, mine looks like chicken scratch, and he'll send me a Christmas card or whatever. And it's like, man, everything is perfect with Dennis. And I've learned so much from him about engraving, what patterns should be, and so forth. After he did this gun, he kind of fell in love with it. He goes, man, that turned out so nice, Brian. I didn't think I liked the pattern as much as I did until I did it. And so Dennis Keyes did the engraving. Of course, he did his signature on the front of the frame as in his traditional place. Paul Persinger, an old friend of mine, a stock maker, did the ivory, and he did the notches for me. Of course, it has the eagle on the left panel, and GSP, the George Patton initials on the right panel, has the lanyard ring, lanyard loop, whichever, and of course silver plated, just like the original. And this gun's essentially perfect. I mean, as in timing, lock work, how it shoots. Spent quite a little bit of time getting everything just adjusted perfectly on the sight. So, at 50 yards, you can pull down just, dead center as a target, whatever you want to do. So that's just a little bit of a piece of history. But the unique thing is I can use this one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
certainly a nice one.
Yes.
So, I don't know if people will forgive us, but what did Patton say about Mother of Pearl?
I'm glad you asked me that. You tell us and I'll respond.
So people would always comment on his guns and say they're, your pearl-handled guns or whatever, and he would come back and say, Pearl is for a cheap pimp in a New Orleans whorehouse or something like that. Yeah, something along those lines. But my guns are ivory. My stocks are ivory, as they would say.
Well, now my response to that is that's an interesting thing. I'm glad you actually brought that up, because back in the day, all of Samuel Colt's guns that he gave away as presentation guns to dignitaries, presidents, whatever, they always wore mother of pearl stocks. And if you go back through the old price lists through the late 1800s, early 1900s, pearl was typically 3-4 times more than ivory. And what's also interesting is that ivory was more popular in certain parts of the country than pearl, and pearl more popular in others. In the South, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, pearl was very popular. Mm-hmm. And whereas up north, I don't know why, style thing, durability, I don't know, but up north, ivory was more popular. And I think ivory honestly was more durable. Pearl's hard and tended to break and flake. Modern pearl's even worse. But my comment about that is, further comment is, George Patton apparently did not know Tom Three Persons. Tom Three Persons, we'll do a video on him one of these days. That was a real interesting character, but he was a true Old West gunfighter in El Paso, Texas, and his personal Colt was a 4 3/4 inch nickel gun with a custom Patridge style front sight and mother of pearl stocks on a carved. And we'll do a view on that sometime. But yeah, it was interesting. Patton's comments on that. Pretty funny, actually.
So just a few things I'd like to add as well. So Dan already mentioned Patton's fighting spirit. He was certainly a warrior to the heart. The controversies I was talking about earlier. So the main ones. So in World War I, in his writings, he kind of nonchalantly mentioned how he probably killed a U.S. soldier over there. He was Patton, of course, got involved with tank warfare in World War I, and at one point he was attacking a German machine gun nest and ended up getting shot through the leg. He said it made like a silver dollar exit wound through his butt, and he was going to the rear and saw an American soldier that was refusing to do anything, refusing to work. I think he was supposed to be digging in a defensive entrenchment. So Patton grabbed a shovel and hit the guy over the head, and then didn't bother to see if he was alive or dead. He said, I may have killed the guy, And then in World War II, on 2 separate occasions, he was visiting hospitals and saw, on 2 separate occasions, saw soldiers that had no apparent wounds. They were completely physically healthy, but had broken under the strain with mental, shell shock or whatever. And he struck them on 2 different occasions, punched them or whatever. And in Patton's eye, he hated a coward. And in all 3 of those instances, the guys were showing cowardice in Patton's opinion. And of course, that caused an uproar in the United States. And some people supported him. Some people thought he should be removed from command. And then the second thing that was really kind of controversial.
Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Modern psychologists today will claim Patton was a narcissist, had narcissistic personality disorder or whatever. I'm not going to say that. I didn't know him, but somebody that has to lead and charge and is in continual battle, they can certainly come off as that way, because the soldiers that had mental breakdowns or whatever, I mean, we don't know what they saw. I mean, those wars were horrific. I mean, their friends, their brothers, their whatever getting killed, watching them die in battle, they were horrific. Nothing short of it. And Patton, all he could see is, I still got guys over here laying here that are legitimately wounded, had their leg blown off or whatever.
Yeah.
And he couldn't see the internal wounds that was causing. So I just inject that. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, and it's true. Just kind of going along that thought, Patton was also like, well, I've got guys on the front line that are risking their lives, and you are just sitting in the back, not doing anything. And you can certainly see his thought process, even though, and to him, he's of course a mentally tough warrior to the heart, and it really didn't affect him to the same way that it would affect other people, to see that type of stuff. So next thing that was kind of controversial, at the end of World War II, Patton was claiming we were fighting and defeated the wrong enemy. And he, of course, was basically talking about the Russians and how he was actually a staunch anti-communist, hated communism to the core, and made quite a few comments about that. And actually, I believe World War II had ended in Europe, at least at the time, and he was kind of the military governor of a section of Germany, and he got removed from command for that. And making those types of comments. So let's see. Oh, the other interesting thing is when you go and read what the enemy, so the German commanders, thought about Patton. It's quite interesting. Rommel, even Hitler himself, Hitler supposedly said, referred to Patton as that crazy cowboy general. Rommel, let's see, Rundstedt, Kesselring, Jodl, they all made comments to the effect that, he's basically your best field commander you have. And it was proven, I mean, I shouldn't say it was proven without a doubt, but like he certainly helped end the war and helped defeat the Germans in a pretty big way. One last kind of controversial topic is Patton was in 1944, after the D-Day landings. Of course, Patton was in charge of the Third Army, and in August of 1944, supply lines had increased because the Allies were moving inland through France and whatnot. And there's kind of a halting to the lines because the supply lines were just too long, and they were running out of fuel and whatnot. And Patton believed that if he got all the resources and everybody else was stopped, he could have penetrated the German Siegfried Line and probably ended the war in 1944. And of course, I guess we'll never know, but that was his big claim. If they would have just given him the resources, he could have ended the war before winter set in. So,
a lot of politics in war.
Yeah, there is. There certainly is. And kind of going along that line, just the politic part, Patton was certainly not afraid to speak his mind and criticize others when he felt they fairly deserved to be criticized, but he was also one of the first ones to stand up for somebody that he felt was being unfairly punished or criticized for their actions. So,
spoke his mind, didn't he?
Spoke his mind, yeah. Certainly an interesting individual. So, of course, there's many books on Patton, so pretty interesting subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of his best quotes, in my opinion, is when he said, always do more than is expected. And it's like, man, today's world, that seems opposite from what people do. People seem to want to do the least they can get away with.
Yeah.
And I love that quote because it applies in everything in life. But he was definitely an interesting man, and I absolutely could maintain he was murdered. And too many fishy events, too many facts surrounding that. There have been books written specifically on that, many books actually, and when you even when you take it from different angles, you say, I'm sorry, things don't match up. And
So that's Patton. if you guys want to see more videos like this on, more historically focused subjects, let us know in the comments what you guys want to see, and we'll see if we can't get them done. You have anything else you want to add?
I think that's it.
Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
We did, one thing, we did do a shooting short on this. We'll probably do more of shooting with it later. So
Yeah.
stay tuned. Check it
Yeah.
out. Thanks
Yeah.
for joining us.
Yeah, we'll certainly do a shooting video on Patton's gun.
Yeah.